piece is we're going to talk about cuneiform, because cuneiform is a big deal in archaeology as well. And how are we able to read cuneiform? Well, if you want to pull up the Behistun inscription, this one's really cool because this was...
Is that the one? Here, let me pull it up.
The cliffside one.
Yes. Okay. The cliffside one.
This one is fascinating. It's hard to say when it was first discovered because it's on a cliff and people can have seen it but just not know when it was. But it's Sir Henry Rawlinson is the first one to take copies of it. And he actually, this thing is only over 300 feet up in the air on a sheer cliff. And he has a ledge about this big that he had to stand on and make rubbings of it to get it's. Nope. I was like, you think you're dedicated to archaeology, this guy? Oh my goodness. But because he did this and he sacrificed and risked his life so many times, he took it home and he had background in different languages. I think he had a background in Coptic, Syrian, and Aramaic, I think. But because he had this background, he was able to translate the name, one of the key names in this inscription, which was of Darius, King Darius the First, who we call Darius the Great. And he's the same Darius that's mentioned in the Bible. And in Daniel. And so it's a big deal. So not only do we have an inscription that mentions a king in the Bible, in Daniel, but then we had this door open to now be able to translate cuneiform. And that leads us to the tablets. And the first one is called Atrahasis. And this is part of what we would call the flood tablets, kind of a collection. And this one dates to around 1700s BC, this particular one. But what it contains is a flood legend from the land of Mesopotamian area. And it records that the gods created mankind to be their servant, their slaves. Mankind rebelled. The gods got annoyed, struck them down with a flood, but then they saved one man in this coracle boat. And it's interesting because it's recorded in this cuneiform tablet that we couldn't have read unless we found the Behistun inscription. And that is also connected with the Gilgamesh epic, which is the next tablet, which is important because it also mentions the flood.
Mm-hmm. In more detail.
Oh, wow.
And this is just the 10th tablet. Yeah, I think the flood tablet is tablet 10 of the Gilgamesh epic.
All of these tablets, there are multiple tablets. But this one in particular is a picture, I think it might be 10 or 11, this one. But it's a big deal because we've emphasized Genesis, obviously answers in Genesis, and the flood as being historically accurate and it was real, global. And so these are early recordings of at least other cultures also recognizing that this actually was an event as well.
Yeah, and they actually predate Moses. So there a lot of times the skeptics or liberal theologians say, the Moses just copied from these, or they don't even think Moses wrote. They think Ezra maybe wrote or compiled too. And they'll say whoever the biblical author was, he's just copying from these. But there's so many problems with that. One, the Bible gives us an ark that actually has the correct dimensions for a seagoing vessel, whereas if you look at the Gilgamesh epic, it's a cube, which would float, but it would rock so badly from side to side, you would not survive inside of it. The Atrahasis epic has a coracle. It's like a round one. And so Irving Finkel, who's the guy who was able to translate another tablet of the Atrahasis epic, they tried to reconstruct the coracle at 1/4 the size not too long ago. As soon as they put it out in the water, it sank. But the Bible has the right dimensions. There's so many things about the biblical account that tell us this is historical, whereas these other ones are echoes of the real event. It's not that one is copying from the other. It's that all three, and plus all these other hundreds of flood legends that we find from around the world, they're telling of the same event, but the Bible has given us the true and accurate and inspired historical record, whereas these other ones are distortions of that with greater or lesser degrees of accuracy.
Yeah, and kind of correct me here, but in the movie that you starred in, the Ark of the Darkness, so I watched it.
Yeah, that wasn't me. Sorry,
You're not a movie star.
So for my audience, we were talking before the show.
I'll send later if you want. Yeah.
Tim is interviewed in a great documentary called Ark in the Darkness. But anyway, it's at the tower. Everybody when we all had the same language, like of course when we got scattered and people became pagan, got further and further away from God. Of course, they're going to remember that crazy event, but they're going to tell it way differently because they're just so far away from God. So, something along those lines, if you can.
And it's almost like the telephone game too. As you hand it down generation after generation, you get these distortions that change as somebody's telling it as a story, and so you get that kernel of truth. But what else is super interesting about that is not in those cultures around the world, we're also finding traditions or legends about how man was made from the dust of the ground, and then the gods or a great spirit or this whirlwind made him alive, which is similar to the biblical account, of course distorted. The reason that man dies, or the reason that man has become wicked, has something to do with a tree and or a serpent. That's found in dozens and dozens of these places around the world. Before missionaries get there, you have about almost 24 Babel legends from around the world that sound very similar to Genesis 11. And then from Abraham, like Genesis 12 onward, nothing. They have no knowledge of that. Well, because what we read in Genesis 11 is absolutely true, that what happened at Babel happened. And so we find greater confirmation of that in these legends around the world.
Yeah, wild stuff.
It's exciting. It's cool.
Yeah.